The House Armed Services Committee is working on its version of the National Defense Authorization Act. The Senate Armed Services Committee did its bill last week, mostly behind closed doors. The final bill's pay raise provision will impact more than just uniformed personnel. Jessica Klement is Staff Vice President of Policy and Programs at the National Active and Retired Federal Employees Association. Jessie, welcome. Thanks for coming on the program. What came out in the Senate's bill? What do you expect the House to look at the National Defense Authorization Act? And if I'm a civilian at a civilian agency, why do I care?
Good, very good question, and thanks again for having me, Francis. So, like you noted, Senate Armed Services Committee markups were closed. They have historically been closed over the last several years. In the, I think it was 42-page summary of the FY22 NDAA, it noted a 2.7% pay raise for military personnel that matches what Biden had in his budget. Biden had proposed, I should say, in his budget.
What does that mean for civilian personnel in DOD, if anything? What does it mean for civilian personnel at other agencies, Jessie? How closely does that track what goes in the NDAA every year?
Quite frankly, it means nothing. If you look at the text of that summary, SASC will say this assumes the 2.7% pay raise for federal employees at DOD. But the NDAA does not authorize that. It's assuming that that is what appropriations will do, and that's just for DOD employees. What federal employees should care about and the raise that they're going to get is what both chambers are doing as it relates to appropriations, most notably the Financial Services and General Government Appropriations Bill, which is part of the 7-bill appropriations package that's going to be on the House floor this week. Debate started today. That bill is silent as it relates to the federal employee pay raise, and I'd be happy to explain what that means for federal employees if we have the time.
Well, we have the time. That's what you're here for, Jessie, so please go ahead.
Great. I'd be happy to. So when appropriations is silent, which has been the case on and off a lot in the last decade. A 3-year pay freeze started in 2011. And prior to 2011, the federal employee pay raise was almost always in this appropriations bill. And for the most part, it was at parity with the military pay raise. Then we had that pay freeze from 2011 to 2013, and things got a little wonky. Sometimes it was in appropriations, sometimes it wasn't. So when the pay raise is not explicit in the Financial Services and General Government Appropriations Bill, action on the pay raise defers to the president. So I'm sure you saw the headlines the last few weeks, federal employees slated to receive 2.7% pay raise next year. That is not a given. It is not in that appropriations bill. The next step, if that 2.7% were to become a reality, is President Biden needs to send a memorandum to the Hill by the end of August outlining his intentions for the pay raise. Of course, anything can change between now and September 1st. Do I think it will? Probably not, but that 2.7% pay raise isn't a given until Biden sends that memo.
So I understand all of that, and I appreciate the explanation. The silver lining, if there is even a cloud, is that 2.7 seems to be the floor and not the ceiling. There's a lot of times in the past number of years we've been discussing these issues, Jessie, where the number that was being floated seemed to be a ceiling. It seems like this is the reverse. Is that a fair read on my part?
I think anything is possible, right? That's why I would prefer it if the 2.7% was explicit in this appropriations bill, then we wouldn't have to guess what's going to happen. I think given that the 2.7% tracks with what happened in the private sector over the previous 12 months, as well as what is most likely going to happen for the military, in those two things being reality, at this point in time, I would say that 2.7 is probably the ceiling and not the floor. I think it's going to be an unlikely day where federal employees get a larger pay raise than military personnel, and that 2.7, while certainly nowhere near final as it relates to congressional action, I think is pretty much a done deal at this point for military personnel.
All right, you mentioned the House appropriations package is coming to the floor this week. What do we know about where the Senate package stands and what's there?
Oh, if only I had an answer for that. I'm not even sure folks in the Senate do right now. There has been no action on appropriations in the Senate at this point in time to talk about that. At least last I had checked. If I had to take a guess, I would say the federal employee pay raise in the FSGG bill would be silent again. There's one other thing that I think would be of interest to your viewers, if you don't mind, as it relates to the pay raise. There is no information on what locality pay is going to look like. This is an average 2.7%. If this was a normal year, it would have been 2.2 across the board and half a percent reserved for locality pay. You know, some people get more, some people get less as it relates to locality pay, the average being 2.7. The president's budget was not explicit as to what he intends to do with locality pay, which I think is telling. And it is unlikely we will have answers to that until closer to the end of the year.
30 seconds left, Jesse. Could that have to do with the fact that OPM hasn't really figured out what it thinks it should do about locality pay, given the likelihood of the explosion in remote work among the federal workforce?
Well, it's a question I most certainly have asked, and I did not get a satisfying answer to that. I think that is a perfectly reasonable conclusion to draw as we discuss the future of work countrywide, not just with the federal workforce, but if your station is in DC and you have permanent remote work, say somewhere in the Midwest, should you still be receiving the DC locality pay? I have no doubt that is a conversation that is most likely taking place within the administration.
Jessica, thanks very much as always, my friend. It's great to see you.
You too. Thanks, Francis.